And today I'm here with Mr. Cohen to talk about Metuchen's social and emotional learning program. Could you tell me about Metuchen's efforts to support the district's social and emotional intelligence?
So we've known, as a principal and as well as a parent, I think we see kids today struggling more and more with day-to-day activities than before. In terms of academic struggles, some kids struggle just to get themselves to school, or parents struggle to get their child just to go to school. Socially, we see kids struggling more at lunch or at recess, a little more anxious about interacting with their peers in person, or as parents we see just having kids get together outside of school in person less frequent, or more anxious for some kids to participate in those kind of activities. And then emotionally, we see kids struggling more with, managing their emotions, especially in school. We see more extreme outbursts. And so the idea for our cell programming and working towards building social and emotional intelligence is really trying to equip the kids with the abilities to better manage those challenges themselves, as opposed to, because we're seeing a little bit more and more kids being more and more dependent on the adults to get through the emotion or to get through a social challenge or academic.
And do you think COVID has played a role in this issue at all?
Yeah, COVID's played a huge role. I think it's important to understand that there were a lot of academic, social, and emotional challenges that kids were facing, and in some cases at all-time highs before the pandemic, where academic stress was considered at an all-time high, and on a national survey of high school kids, 70% said academic stress was their biggest stressor. The social pressures that kids were dealing with, just trying to manage social media, there's plenty of reports that said just because a kid has a smartphone now, they're dealing with a greater deal of stress than ever before in terms of social stress. And then emotionally, 1 out of 5 kids before the pandemic were sort of qualified as having mental health concerns, and that was an all-time high since that data has been recorded. Then the pandemic hits, and all of that gets magnified, where kids are having a harder time learning, let's say with remote or hybrid, and now that maybe we're getting through the pandemic, kids feel pressure to sort of accelerate or catch up, and that's very hard to do and stressful. Socially, they haven't had as much, especially younger kids may have spent a long time not interacting in person, and now it's more challenging because they haven't had that experience or those opportunities. And then emotionally, there's a lot more emotional distress. And so COVID definitely magnified what was already a lot of challenges that kids are facing in the U.S. today.
Yes, of course. So let's talk about solutions to this problem then. If COVID has magnified this, it's how can we, if technology is almost the source of this problem, I think it can also be the solution, as you mentioned before, and that's kind of the newer approach the district is planning to take with technology. So why should parents support their child's social and emotional intelligence?
Great. So, when you look at what the keys to success in school, there's a lot of research that shows that when social emotional learning interventions are provided, students' academic performance increases dramatically, as well as then they show greater ability to manage emotional distress and more pro-social behaviors. So from their performance at school, there's a lot of benefit. As far as parents go, not only do you want your child to have more success at school, but then that carries over into life, and then of course these are now the skills that more and more employers are looking for in terms of emotional intelligence, the ability to collaborate and work with others. A lot of decision making and problem solving are core to social emotional learning and success in the workplace.
I was actually just talking to my friend about how there are different kinds of intelligences in the world. So to just be good through numbers, or just at school, just based on the numbers and the grades that you're getting, is sometimes not enough once you leave to go into the real world. And so I think starting this at a young age is so vital for Metuchen District.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful that you're seeing that there are different kinds of intelligences, right? And so, intelligence itself is really when you can think adaptively and look at new situations, find some information about it, process that information, and then maybe address or respond thoughtfully or intelligently, right? But of course, you find that in academic situations where kids can be given an academic challenge and they can, identify what's the challenge and what information or what resources they have, and then respond like correctly or appropriately or successfully. Same with social situations, and same with dealing with our feelings, right? So, and we see that different kids have different abilities. Their natural intelligences are there. Some kids are naturally academically intelligent, right? And other kids are socially intelligent, or other kids are emotionally intelligent. But the challenge today is to be successful, you really need all three. And it can all be developed with this one strategy approach that we're using in Metuchen. We have, the way I guess we've been naming it now more and more is it's a self-cue approach, where the idea is that kids can cue or prompt their own intelligence. And the way in which they can self-cue or self-prompt or self-guide their intelligence, their thinking abilities, and their problem-solving, decision-making abilities is give them a step-by-step process to follow, and then ask open-ended questions each step of the way of the process. Okay. And when the adults ask those open-ended questions to kids, the kids can do the thinking. They can do the thinking in an academic setting, they can do the thinking socially, and they can do the thinking emotionally. But what some kids just need to do is have it broken down step by step, so it's not so overwhelming. And then when you get to one step, asking that open-ended question kind of prompts or cues the thinking that's needed for that step. And so with a self-cue approach, the more and more we as adults ask those same kind of questions in that same sequence and order, kids can internalize and sort of memorize the steps and the questions, and they can begin to ask themselves those questions. They can recognize, okay, I have a math academic problem, let's say. First thing I got to do is ask myself, well, what's the problem? It's a word problem, and I got to figure out what the problem is even asking, right? Then I've got to say, okay, what information can I gather, or how can I gather information? Then once I get that information, I can ask myself, okay, well, what are possible ways to solve this math problem? And you try it, and then you say, did it work? And just going through those steps with those questions, we're finding more and more kids are able to sort of take a step back, have a think about what they're trying to do, be more thoughtful each step of the way, and have more success because they're not so overwhelmed. And then the more and more they practice it in math, the more and more they have success with it, the more and more they feel confidence with just taking it one step at a time and thinking it through one step at a time, prompting themselves through with the questions. They can then apply those same steps and questions to a problem with somebody at recess on the playground. What's the problem? How can I gather information about this? I was a vice principal at one point, and a lot of times kids would come and say, well, he said this about me, or she said this about me. And it would be like, well, how do you know? Just asking that question, how do I know, it really helps kids to say, okay, well, I can dive a little deeper in this.
Makes them think about the situation. Yeah.
And it's exactly those questions that make the thinking occur. And so it's the sequence of the questions that help kids think through thoughtfully or intelligently, because it's there, it's in there, it just needs to be made to happen, right, or prompted or cued. And so kids can self-cue their intelligence with these steps and these questions.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that every child is different along this way. So while someone might need more help in the recess part of things, others might need more help in more academic parts, like the step-by-step math problems. So it's about maybe the parents or the teachers noticing about these kids, what do they need the most aid in the school environment so that they can attack that problem.
It's a great point. And the nice thing about having one set of steps and self-questions that can be used in academics or social or emotional is teachers and parents can identify those strengths, right? So let's say, I have 3 kids, and one child is very good at math. And so we kind of talk about how these steps and questions are very easy for them in math, but then maybe socially is more of a challenge. So we say, okay, well, let's take a little bit more time. Let's just take that same approach that you're so successful with in math, but let's just try that same approach out here in a situation or a conflict you're having with a friend. Yeah. And then they feel a little bit more confident and a little bit more comfortable taking on those same questions because they've had success with it in another place, and it allows the parent to kind of provide a support in an area where it might not be so easy for them. But it's a support that's familiar and comfortable.
It's the same reason people sometimes connect sports with maybe an academic problem. They'll be like, in football, they're this number of yards, and then you subtract this number. Having those connections, especially for younger kids, I think, where they're like, oh, I'm familiar with this thing, but maybe not this, so how can I connect the two to ensure that I have a better understanding of that other thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the experiencing those steps and those self-questions in one context builds that familiarity and allows those connections. And you made a great point about how sports and coaching can be a great platform for kids to have that kind of success. And so we see this as an opportunity to say, okay, how can the parent really play the role of that coach as opposed to the parent maybe necessarily being the parent, that kids can understandably worry about talking about social or emotional challenges with the parent. The more and more the parent and child work through these steps and questions together, the child can realize, okay, if I come to mom or dad with a social problem I'm having with a friend, or if I come to them with an emotional challenge I'm having, or a challenge I'm having at school, if they can have that experience where, okay, well, these are the questions that we're going to go through, they'll have a little bit more comfort coming to mom and dad, and knowing what to expect from mom and dad, knowing that they would have the opportunity to say what they think. And when parents use the steps and these open-ended questions each step of the way, the child will feel like, okay, I'm not going to be judged, maybe. I'll really have an opportunity to say what I really think. Yeah. And mom and dad will kind of allow me to try out my thinking as opposed to them giving me an ultimatum or consequences. Yes.
It's a more objective way of speaking to one another rather than opinionated from the parents.
And hopefully that allows the parent to play the coach role. Of course, there are times the parent's got to be the parent, right? But, as kids are dealing with more and more of the day-to-day kind of challenges, I'm finding that as a parent, parenting a child who may be struggling with homework it's hard to do every day. I'd rather step back and say, okay, maybe I could be more of a coach when it comes to homework as opposed to like a disciplinarian or a parent. But the question is, like, how do I play that role as a coach? And so this is a tool that's easily accessible for parents, and that can be shared with kids so that they can work through it together, and the parent is more of a guide on the side. And the more and more that happens, then the child can sort of become their own guide.
Yeah, makes sense. How do you think the community can increase student social and emotional intelligence?
So, I think the school district is doing an incredible job. I'm biased because of my position, but I really give a lot of credit to our administrative team, our board support, and the teachers' use of this self-cue approach with the kids in the classroom. We're seeing 3- and 4-year-olds in our MIP program, children who have executive function deficiencies, being able to cue their own brains through an emotion that they're having. And our teachers have been sharing that with parents so that they can do it at home. I think what the next step for us is that, like, right now our teachers are giving parents, all right, here's the ditto we use to help kids work through a math problem, right? And it's natural for teachers to say, okay, here's the ditto, or here's a Google Doc, and the kids can use that in the classroom. But it's harder for a parent to give the ditto or say, let's open up our Google Docs, right? So this is Self-Cue being an app is a platform in which I think parents can tap into, in Metuchen especially, where the kids are having experience with this self-cue approach in the classroom. Now they have it readily at their fingertips in a platform where kids are comfortable and used to working on in terms of their cell phone. And it can reinforce the same kind of curriculum or same learning that they're doing in school. They can then transfer it easier to the home.
And you'd say that in school they might be more comfortable with that problem solving because it is that kind of step-by-step approach to almost every problem that they solve.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why I think kids are really comfortable with this at school and why we're finding such success with this at school. Number one, step-by-step problem solving is natural to every academic content area.
Yeah.
So it lends itself really well to what the teachers are trying to teach and allows the kids to learn problem solving as they're learning whatever's in the curriculum. I think the kids see this over and over again, so they become more and more proficient at it the more and more they do it. And the teacher is, while the teacher cares a lot about the student, the teacher is also not the parent. And I think the kids get used to engaging in these questions and sharing their thinking with the teacher,
yeah.
and getting positive feedback or helpful feedback, right? So now I think there's the opportunity to bring that into the home where a parent could use this tool and kids can feel comfortable with their experience from school, sharing their thinking with mom and dad, and mom and dad now have a guide so that they can kind of like really be good listeners, and trust that while maybe, you know, one of the questions is, you know, what can we do to solve it, or what can you do to solve it, or what's the best way to solve this problem? And sometimes our kids may say a solution that we as parents don't think is the best one, right? Now, as a teacher or a school counselor, if a student says, all right, this is the best way to solve the problem that I'm facing, yeah. It's a little easier for the teacher or parent to say, all right, well, I'm sorry, the teacher or the counselor to say, well, try that out and come back to me and let's see how that works, right? And there's great learning with that when teachers do that. As a parent, it's harder. Right, so this is an opportunity for the parent to try to develop a strategy or implement a strategy that's working in the school that they can trust, and let the child do more of the problem solving, let the child do more of the thinking, yeah. And then you see how it goes, right? And the parent always has the opportunity to kind of step in when they feel it's necessary. But when it's a day-to-day thing like homework or a social conflict with a friend, we hope parents can have confidence in saying, okay, they're learning to do this in school. Let's see if they can try this here, and if they can fix this themselves, and I can step back. But knowing that they'll be at the next step where we can say, okay, how did it go, and do we need to go back and try again? Especially if a parent is concerned about the way things ended up.
But not always being on top of the situation and, oh, try this, like sitting back a little bit and really letting them figure it out on their own, just like teachers do. Exactly,
and which is why sometimes having some of that interaction occur on the app, right, where maybe the first question is, okay, well, what's the problem, and, you know, what do you know about it? And so the child can kind of take some time to write out their thinking, and then the parent can review it and say, okay, you know, maybe we're ready to start talking about what we could do about this. Or the parent may say, you know what, I think I need a little bit more information about this to understand this.
Yeah.
So the parent always has that opportunity, and then there's that back and forth. And a parent can get comfortable with saying, okay, I'm going to let go a little bit right now, and we'll see what happens next, right? Or I'm going to let go right now, we'll let them try out their solution, and then we'll see how it works out. When face to face in a discussion, I just say, as a parent myself, I'm trying to get to that best solution for my child, because I don't like to see my child in distress.
Yes.
I don't like to see them go through a lot of struggle. Where struggle and distress is an opportunity for our children to learn how to work through it. So it's a way in which to control ourselves as parents from stepping in, going too far too fast, giving those solutions, kind of forces us to allow that space and that time, and realize that it's a process that you have to go through, and only go forward when you're ready to take the next step, but not when the parent's ready to take the next step, but when the child's ready to take the next step.
Because I think if you always have someone telling you all the time, this would be the best solution, so try this out before letting them figure it out on their own, how are they ever going to learn when they grow up? So I think that's kind of the overarching goal of this program, is to just as teachers do in the school, you do have to let them sit back yourself and let them figure it out, so that, because I think in the school environment, they're constantly teaching them how to live on their own, how to ultimately live on their own in the future, and make these decisions for themselves. But you're right, in the home, it's hard for parents to not step in and say, this is the smartest idea, because for your well-being, I want you to get to the solution the quickest way possible, so I'm going to tell you what to do. What are some helpful resources or other helpful resources that parents can use for this, maybe aside from just the app?
Well, for selfish reasons, I'll recommend, so that we wrote a book on how to do this as a teacher, right? So this is a how-to book, literally how to teach academic, social, and emotional intelligence in every content area. It's called The Metacognitive Student. I do think this can be a helpful resource for parents, in the sense that there's an explanation of the research and the evidence behind this approach. Really, this whole approach comes from the field of psychology. And so what we've done with this book in The Metacognitive Student is saying, well, how do you take the best practices from the field of psychology and put it into the field of education, right? And so we've been able to do that. We explain how here. The way you apply the best from the field of psychology in terms of metacognition and guiding self-talk and social and emotional problem solving and coping skills, the way in which we've smushed it into education is the same way you would bring it to the home. There's really no difference between the way we apply this in the classroom to the way you can apply it in your home. So I think that's one way if parents wanted to learn a lot more. I also, we've done parent academies where we offer opportunities for parents to get trained on how to do this. They get an understanding of how it's done in the classroom, but then how they can bring it to their home. That's when we do provide like dittos like this. We have posters that they can use, and we have Google Docs that they can use too. But we're finding more and more that, when a parent understands, and that can come from reading the book, or if it come from attending some of our parent academies that we'll continue to offer in the future, then it's really a function of being able to have those interactions with the child. And those interactions can come face-to-face. That's when the best. But sometimes we as parents have a hard time, being process-oriented and posing open-ended questions as the extent of our role as parents when we're emotionally attached to our children and the outcomes. So it seems like a technology tool is providing some parents an easier way in which to be successful in implementing this approach from the field of psychology as a parent to their child.
Or at least to start that approach so that they can get more comfortable with than doing it face-to-face or trying other ideas at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is really like the app would be a mediator to get started. And to the point where then, okay, now future interactions can occur face-to-face more and more, because parents are a little bit more used to the structure, used to the approach, and understand the value of it for their child, right? And they can see, starting off with the app, okay, they were able to handle that one, right? They had some great ideas. That's working. All right, now we can do this more face-to-face. And then the end goal is that the student no longer needs the adult to talk through those questions anymore. Now they can just literally self-cue, right? They'll ask themselves the question, they'll give their best response, they'll go to the next step and the next question, and they'll work through until they get to what they feel is their best solution. They'll try it out, and they can determine for themselves, that worked great, I'm past that problem, or that didn't work, I'm going to go back and try that another step again. And that's the ultimate goal. This is really more of what we call in teaching a gradual release approach. And the idea is that sometimes because release is hard for parents, this gets them started.
Yeah, and eventually that step-by-step process just comes natural to the children who are starting this process, which I think is really important to understand, because there are a lot of things that talk about psychology or the way our minds work. Us as young adults or as an adult, we do go through these step-by-step processes in our head kind of subconsciously. We don't really realize that when we're making a decision, there are maybe 5 questions we ask ourselves, because it's not actually written down like this program would be, but beginning that at such a young age, and then kind of allowing support for that, but not telling them, oh, what you should or should not be doing, I think is so important. And then, again, they just naturally do that when they're older.
Right. Yeah. You know, the idea is that parents can provide what we call like a scaffold. It's a support that, you know, builds up over time, as opposed, so you want to provide a scaffold as opposed to solutions.
Yeah. Makes sense. So is there anything else you want the families in Metuchen to know about the program?
Well, one thing I want parents to understand is that we're finding great success with this approach in Metuchen schools. Mm-hmm. We're seeing our kids thriving academically. We just got our in-house assessments for the end of the year, and we're seeing that our kids are now performing academically at the same levels they were before the pandemic. So we're ecstatic that, you know, we've been able to help the kids get through, and there was a lot that went into that. So this is not the only area, but one of the reasons why we feel like this is working is that we're not seeing an increase in the need for mental health referrals. We are not seeing repeat offenders in terms of discipline. So we think it's helping academically, socially, and emotionally. We've gotten a number of national awards from character.org. The book just got an award for Best Book in Education for 2022, and it's been nominated for another award, which we'll find about tomorrow. The middle school has been nominated for a Blue Ribbon Award, which is sort of like the Pulitzer in terms of education. Mm-hmm. So we're just seeing as our students thrive more and more, and we're getting recognition from experts in the field or from these recognitions from different awards, we're feeling more and more confidence in the efficacy of this approach in our classrooms. And as we're getting parents to try it out more and more and more, we're hearing the feedback from them that they see the value and see it working with their child. We just want to say, hey, we want to not only be able to utilize the success that we're having here in the school and that other people are recognizing, and make it a tool for you in your home, but that partnership is where you really accelerate, right? And if we can partner around increasing our children's intelligence in academic, social, and emotional contexts, the outcomes for our kids is just really, really exciting.
Yeah. So in other words, it's working. It's just about, you know, initiating that first step, or just that getting started, and the parents saying, you know what, like, let me learn how to approach this problem, or to help my kids approach these problems for their future.
Exactly.
Sounds great.